How you doing, guys? And welcome to Advanced Performance Radio, Episode 3. Today we've got Aaron Scafi, elite strength coach based out of Melbourne, Australia, talking to us about all things strength, powerlifting, strength programming, rehab, and everything it means to be strong. We hope you enjoyed the podcast. Leave a review, and we'll catch you on the next one. Where are we? We're recording. We're recording. All right. So today's episode of Advanced Performance Radio, episode number 3, we've got Aaron Scafi, elite strength coach from Melbourne. He's going to be talking to us today about all things strength programming and everything that sort of coincides with that. Obviously, the rise in more strength programming in gyms and strength training, specifically in women. So first off, I'll let Aaron introduce himself and give us a bit of background on what he does, where he's from. The floor's yours, man.
Thanks for having me on. Name's Aaron, elite strength coach on Instagram. What do I do? I don't do much. I do online coaching. That's pretty much what I do now.
Yeah.
I basically run nutrition, rehabilitation, strength training, hypertrophy, and sort of body recomp stuff for most of my clientele. They're all sort of all encompassing. And then I also educate on PEDs. So
For people that don't know what PEDs are, do you want to just touch on that?
Just performance enhancing drugs. So basically just anabolics and that sort of stuff.
We weren't going to talk about that today because you've been talking about it enough lately. So we'll go back to this.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of nice to jump on a podcast and not talk about PEDs, to be honest. It's my second one so far. I think I've done about 8 or 9 podcasts and they've all been on PEDs. And I was like, look at this, a second podcast without talking about PEDs. This is nice. But yeah, man, my background? So exercise physiology. So exercise science biomechanics, exercise physiology, and then actually going back to study a degree in pharmacology.
Yeah.
So literally have no life, to be honest. So it's literally work, train, eat, sleep, study.
And a lot of hex debt.
That's it. Future Aaron to deal with, man. I don't even worry about that. The goal is not to make enough money where I have to pay it back.
Just sitting in that comfort zone.
That's exactly right.
All right, man. So obviously with gyms starting to reopen, excluding you guys, of course, like Aaron's in Melbourne, so he's unfortunately in that predicament that everyone else was in. But in general with gyms, I've seen a massive prevalence in the last, say 5 to 6 years of strength training becoming a lot more popular in gyms, in terms of like bench, dead squat and training in a powerlifting sort of style. God, I remember when I first started PTing, you'd never see women doing squats and deads and bench. And now it's like every second person is doing squats, deads and bench specifically for strength programming. What do you think contributes to that? What do you think contributes to strength programming becoming so much more popular?
I think social media has been one of the biggest things when it comes to strength training in the gym, more so the big 3, but I guess the big 3 being the squat, bench and dead. It's like powerlifting sort of popularized them and just said, this is our sport. These 3 lifts, 3 attempts, but they're not necessarily powerlifting lifts. The lifts were around before powerlifting were around. Yep. So, the lifts themselves are purely just for strength, or they can be used for athletic development and all that sort of stuff. If you're using variations of lifts and all that sort of stuff. I think just powerlifting and social media made it a bit more popular. So I think then, go on.
Now, do you think certain people, like obviously, I would say people like Steffi Cohen would have a huge impact on that.
I was then going to say then just the rise of social media and those that are popular made them a little bit more popular, I guess. And then you see some freak athletes like Steph Cohen and all these guys, lifting some extreme weight, and it's just cool to watch.
Yeah. And do you think that's obviously with strength training, it's more accessible for the general public rather than say like bodybuilders, where obviously it takes years of sort of groundwork to even be able to be competitive. Whereas I guess with strength program, people can sort of just drop straight in the deep end and have a crack at it. Do you think that's contributed to it?
Yeah, it's interesting because it depends how you're measuring strength, but I guess, in the general context of strength, using the big 3, it's easier to get stronger in the big 3. Obviously, the more you do it, so it's easier to do. And also considering you only need a barbell, potentially a rack or a bench and a couple of plates. Whereas something like hypertrophy, you need all the machines, you need all the dumbbells, all the machines that you get your hands on, and then just doing rep on rep on rep. Whereas strength training is more neural than it is anything else. And I was actually having this conversation with a client this morning because got her in a hypertrophy block, and she was like, well, I just don't want to do all these reps anymore. I'm like, well, you want to get bigger. You genuinely want to put on lean tissue. There's a difference between putting on lean tissue and just getting stronger. Getting stronger doesn't necessarily mean you put on tissue.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like obviously, especially with people like who are in like those sort of lighter weight brackets or like in the like 60, 70 kilo range, they can get a hell of a lot stronger, but obviously not grow an awful lot. Like, you know what I mean? I've seen some of the female lifters specifically that can literally almost double all their lifts, but their weight's not really going to fluctuate that much. Whereas for say someone like, in order for a male counterpart to get that strong, they're going to have to get bigger because I guess the balance is skewed. So like say for instance, for a female going from a 100 kilo squat to a 200 kilo squat, obviously 200 kilo squat being a very, very advanced lift for a female, their weight might not shift that much in order to do so. Whereas if say a guy wanted to go from a 200 kilo squat to say a 400 kilo squat, the weight shift is going to be a huge difference. And like, I guess a good example of that is Big Dylan from over in WA, Dylan Hellriegel, squats like 465, weighs 170, weighs about 170 kilos when he competed at Pro Raw and Big Dogs. But he was 4 years prior, he was only 99 kilo.
Yeah, exactly.
So like it's a huge, huge gain of weight, obviously. But then he's, I guess, I'm not sure if is he the current junior world record holder?
Oh, well, I couldn't tell you, to be quite honest off the top of my head. I imagine he would be. I couldn't see someone beating it, but I know he is the only person to have squatted 1,000 and pulled 900 pounds in a comp, and that was a pro.
Yeah, in the same comp, he's the only one ever to do it. And it's pretty amazing considering Dylan's like 6'9", so like he's a giant, big dude. Looks like he belongs on a battlefield swinging an axe at someone.
He looks like a Viking.
Yeah, he does, man. And he's a super nice dude though. If you ever get the chance to talk to him, he's a really nice guy. But and it is the man. Like I think with squats, deadlifts, and bench, I think because of social media, like I'm not sure if you've seen any of Chris Duffin's content on instructional. I think a lot of people avoided those lifts, even only going back as far as like say 6 years ago, 7 years ago. People avoided those lifts because there wasn't that many people being able to teach them effectively.
That's very true.
And I think obviously with there being more like access to like courses, like I know I did Sebastian Oreb's level 1 and 2, and he is exceptionally good at instructing those 3 lifts and breaking them down to a really simplified point where general public can pick them up and people who are already doing them can obviously advance and become more proficient in them. But I think with social media, it's people are getting access to decent level instructional videos to the point where like, for instance, when I first did my PT course, God knows how many years ago, I did my PT course with a guy named Daniel Macri. He's from over this way, so he's WA's only professional strongman, or was until I think that the lighter category Kiwi guy was competing. Anyway, Dan, we were doing our squat session in our PT course back in 2006, 2007. And our lecturer was teaching us to squat with like knees behind toes and like all that sort of bullshit. Yeah. And then Dan's like, that's not how you squat. And the lady's like, I suppose you know better. He's like, well, I'm WA's strongest man, so I think I probably would.
Yeah. It's like I squat 300. I know something.
But yeah, and I think it is. I think now most people can jump on YouTube and see like fairly decent level instructional videos. Breaking down obviously the all the different concepts and bits and pieces to make that lift actually proficient. Like God, I think it's only maybe the last 5 to 10 years where keeping your knees behind your toes has been come out as like an absolute load of crap. Like before that, everyone was just like doing it. And I see bodybuilders still do it now. Like they're squatting with their knees behind their toe.
It's a very old mentality, a very old philosophy, I think. I could understand it sort of when you think about it, I guess from a safety standpoint, you know, if you're going to teach, because moving is so individual. I think if you're trying to teach populations of people how to do a certain movement, you want to probably standardize it and make it as safe as possible. So maybe back then the thought process was, you know, knees behind toes or just in line with toes is going to be the safest option for a bigger populace versus, going through individual people and going, okay, your movement is going to be this movement's going to be this for you. It's going to be a bit different for you. But hey, we evolve, right?
Yeah. And that's the thing. Also on that same situation is obviously that people used to obviously say like, only squats are parallel because it's bad for your knees to go to full deadlift.
Yeah,
and all that sort of
exactly
stuff.
right.
And I think that could be sort of put into the same category as what you just said.
Yeah.
With like, say for instance, people going deep in squats, obviously getting like butt wink, and then ending up with like curved spine and then like pressure on L4, L5 sort of stuff. I think maybe that could have fallen into that same category. I'm hoping that was the case, but like,
I mean, that's sort of the only logical process I can sort of come across when it comes to that sort of standardizing complicated movements. It's like, I don't like to standardize a complicated movement personally. It's just how I think I am and how I operate. But I think trying to look from outside in, that's probably the mentality behind it. Try and make it as safe as possible. But hey, who knows?
Yeah. And that's the thing, like you say, with those 3 lifts, I think especially with squat, it's so individualized and it can be tweaked in so many different ways to cater for the individual. Like even like for someone who's quite a big guy who has to squat, I guess, wider stance, get their hips right back, switch to a low bar squat because they're quite a big frame person. And then the other context when you see these like Korean and Chinese lifters who can literally squat completely vertical with no issues whatsoever. And I just, the vast populace can't do that. And I think
exactly right.
It's like, it's very individualized in that way. And I think that's where things have started to evolve. And obviously the content explaining these lifts has started to progress and allowed people to get a better insight into lifts, and that there's not a one size fits all. It's not like, okay, you have to fit yourself inside this box to do this lift, but the box needs to change to suit you. Do you think that, I guess we'll talk about instructional for a bit, with teaching people to squat? Do you think one thing that I've noticed is that a lot of people have these sort of not structural imbalances, postural imbalances now, resulting from work and social life and what they've been doing that can prevent them from sort of doing these 3 lifts. Like you see a lot of people try them who have poor ankle mobility, poor hip mobility, forward thoracic spine, and all these sort of things prevent them from being able to perform the exercises effectively, which is why they tend to avoid them. Do you see that a lot with people that you work with, or?
Yeah, I mean, I guess from a personal experience, it's like, well, when I very first got into the gym when I was sort of that 17, 18-year-old, like I avoided deadlifts. And the only reason why I avoided deadlifts is because I actually didn't know how to deadlift. So I didn't have anyone there that could teach me how to deadlift efficiently. Like I'd see people do some deadlifts and not knowing much at all, but knowing that the movement didn't look right. So from that perspective, I can understand why people wouldn't do a movement because they're scared. But at the same time, it's also on the person that if they would like to do the movement, they also need to go find the source that they can learn from. So with that in mind, it's like, I have clientele that come to me that, office workers, laborers, all this sort of stuff, they all present with different issues and different problems. But at the same time, with, an assessment of sorts to identify potentially what the issues are, if there are any issues, and then getting them moving to their mechanics, to the way that they need to move efficiently as possible for them, is where it's at. I couldn't probably make it any more simple than that. Just movement's so individual to a person. So why wouldn't you then take that person and make it theirs?
Yeah, and I think it's people are starting to realize, I guess this is completely changing directions on this. People are starting to realize that nutrition is individualized and it needs to be done as such. And obviously you would know this working with nutrition as well. But yet they'll still try and do the training program that their mate's doing. They'll understand that, okay, I can't eat like that person because I'm like, it needs to be catered to me. But they'll still try and train like their mate who's been training for, I don't know, 5-6 years of training, or they'll try and train like their 6 foot, 120 kilo friend when they weigh 70 kilos and they're only 5'4". Like I think it is, people see these training programs online, or they see someone doing them and they don't quite realize that program's probably quite advanced. Like a good example of that is that I bumped into a guy in the gym the other day who I speak to quite regularly, and he's attempting Smolov.
That takes me back.
And for anyone who doesn't know what Smolov is like it's a squat
special program.
Designated program that is literally like hell on earth, and you end up squatting like 3 days a week.
Yeah, and you squat 4 times. You squat 4 times a week. It's something.
And that's the end.
It's like 3 10s, 5 7s, 7 5s, 10 3s.
Yeah,
and there's 7 5s, and then the next day is 10 3s, and you do that for a 4-week block.
Yeah,
or a 6-week block. I think Smolov Junior was 4 weeks.
Yeah, and this guy's been training for like a year.
Yeah.
And I was like,
I'm not going to lie. I made that mistake. I did the exact same thing. I would have been training.
So did I.
Yeah, I think I was training for 2 or 3 years. Got onto Smolov because I wanted to improve my squats. I actually added, I think, 45 kilos to my squat from memory, my 1RM.
Yeah.
But I couldn't walk for a good 3 weeks afterwards. So I was like,
Yeah, and I found lower back pain was definitely a prevalent thing coming out of that program as well, just with so much volume. But it is, and I use as an example, like you see people that try and undertake these incredibly advanced training programs with no solid foundation, so to speak. Like I think for most people starting, and I'd like to get your opinion on this, is when they're first starting in training in these lifts and doing them, I guess, frequently with the goal of adding weight on the bar, getting stronger. Do you think people try and overcomplicate the process and they spend not enough time in the foundations of actually getting proficient at the exercises, and not so much they don't spend enough time getting proficient? They're trying to just push weight up, or they're trying to add in extra days?
It's actually a good question, because Brett Contreras actually put up a post a couple of days ago that everyone sort of reshared and went nuts for, that clients seem to want more complex programs than what they need, especially newbies. It's basically less is more for a newbie. And then also from a coaching perspective, if you don't have regression and progression models in place for the movements, then you really need to up your game, because if someone can't squat with a barbell, for example, bodyweight squats, higher squats, box squats, all these sorts of things come into play. And even then, so looking at unilateral work to make sure that, that there's no inefficiencies there, or if the inefficiencies are great, working on that sort of thing. So when it comes to newbies always just wanting to progress weight on a bar, like, it's a great intent, and the mindset behind that is exactly what you want in a client. But at the same time, need to understand, hey, you got to crawl before you can walk. So slow down, get the movement right, get it as efficient as possible with the weight that you're currently using. And then once it's, fluid, start to increase weight, because it's nothing but time.
And I think it's that case of like, okay, am I actually getting stronger, or am I just getting more proficient at doing the exercise? And I think when someone first starts, it's largely that, rather than them actually getting stronger.
Exactly right.
Like you see people, they're like, oh, I'm getting heaps stronger. I can now squat 100 kilos and I can only squat 40 last week. I'm like, yeah, it's because you've never done it a couple of weeks ago. And now you're more proficient at it, and you're using the right muscle groups and sort of just...
it's a skill. So the skill gets better.
It's skill acquisition that's best at its most intricate. And like you work with some people and you can spend an hour, 2 hours just tweaking someone's deadlift or their squat or their bench and making them more proficient at the movement, rather than just trying to chuck weight on the bar. Like let them get good at it first, and then start progressing, so to speak. But it is, and you see people where they get a bit too carried away with those sorts of exercises. The next thing you know, they're trying to go up and up and up and up, adding like 10 kilos every week to their squat. And like, it doesn't quite work like that. And then I guess there's that case of, are they then not being as proficient, and their skill acquisition goes out the window, and their, I guess, technical ability starts to fail, and it's just sort of just flailing through the movements, and it's not really getting what we want out of it. But what sort of setup do you go with clients when you first start?
Before you get into that, I guess the other side to that coin, though, is movement efficiency and proficiency will change with the load on the bar. So the load on the bar will dictate how you move a lot of the time. So the more advanced, like intermediate to advanced athlete, training at sub-maximal percentages, or RP, RIR, however you want to measure, of your 1RM versus, that higher intensity. So if you're training at 60% for sets of 6 versus training doubles at 85%, your 85% doubles are going to look a lot different. They may not be as fluid, they may not look as good, but that's why you're doing as well. So you get more efficient with a higher load, and especially for powerlifting, considering powerlifting is a 1 RM on the day, you need to be moving that one rep as efficiently as possible, but you need to train that one rep. Because with a significant load, otherwise you're not going to be moving very well. So that's just the other side of that coin. I guess when it comes to movement efficiency and getting, a noob to an intermediate level, like they do need to progress with weight on the bar. It's just a matter of when they put more weight on the bar. And that's, I guess, up to the coach, right? And that's why you get a coach.
And I think it's that fine point, that the tipping point of, okay, we're as proficient as we're going to get with that weight. Now we're starting into something.
Exactly. Right. There we go. Exactly. Yeah.
And I think that's a very fine juggling point. And I think that's when it comes down to work, like as you say, working with a coach, because you see a lot of people in the gym who will be squatting, deadlifting, bench pressing, whatever it is. And I see it, I guess, more so with females, and they'll get to a point where they're moving whatever weight they're deadlifting very, very easily with very good technique for 4 sets of 10. And they won't go up. Because they become quite comfortable in moving that weight for 4 sets of 10
exactly right.
with very good technique. And I think it's knowing when to push yourself outside that comfort zone. So obviously then create adaptation to then grow and get stronger.
Exactly right. Yeah, exactly right.
So you say that because you work with some fairly elite athletes, and I remember us talking the other day, you've worked with some people with some fairly big numbers.
Very fortunate.
How do you start things off with people? What's your sort of methodology when you first start with people? What are you looking for? Just what's your...
So it depends. I guess it'll depend on the person, right, and the client and what they're looking for, whether it's a body recomposition, if it's a strength training athlete, if it's someone who wants to do powerlifting, all that sort of thing. So I guess for this sort of conversation, let's use the powerlifter as the example. I'd be looking basically at just a basic movement screen. So it's like a lot of guys that I very rarely get now newbies that have never trained before. I'm quite lucky in that sense, but I do like training with newbies, to be honest, and coaching newbies. But at the moment,
just to stop you on that, why is that? Why do you like coaching newbies? Because I've got my reasons behind it.
So I guess the best way I can put it is, I've been fortunate enough to coach at like the pro raw level, GPC nationals. I've done it all with that sort of stuff in terms of coaching. But my favorite thing is to go to like a novice comp with a brand new lifter and watch them hit that first squat and just the smile on their face. It's just like they are happy. Like you can see the stress leave their face. They've enjoyed themselves. They've had fun. It's the same thing with a newbie client. It's like when you watch them do something for the first time and they get it. It's like, when you roll a strike when you're playing bowling and you have that strike face and you turn around and you don't want to show it. It's like that. It's just like they're proud of themselves. And it's like that's the whole reason why I do what I do. Like I can't see another reason why to coach. Like I'm here to help my client. So it's like they achieve that goal. Okay, job done, like for that day or for that particular session. That's why I like to coach newbies, but at the same time, newbies don't seem to come to me anymore. I get the intermediate and advanced guys.
And I think sort of my reasoning behind liking coaching newbies is they completely clean slates. So like you can work with them to avoid all little, poor technique habits that say someone who's been lifting for 5 or 10 years has picked up. They're like a sponge. They pick everything up. You don't have to sort of get past a person's like ingrained bias to the way of doing a certain movement or whatever else. And it is
true.
I mean, I've worked with some people who are complete newbies who like the first session have deadlifted like 40 kilos in total, just a 10 kilo plate either side. To 12-week block later, they're pulling 150. And it's like that rate of adaptation when coached correctly is just so fast. And like, I wish I could progress that fast now. Like I've been lifting for like 15 years, but it's just not going to happen.
Miss newbie gains.
Yeah. But, what's your steps by steps? Like, how do you start things off with like, I guess someone who's just
so if I'm using the powerlifter again as the example, it's like, well, let's lay out a foundation. So let's see where you're at first and foremost. So I guess for me, I look at the health side of a client first, because that's my primary job, even though they want to come to me for, say, strength training or whatever it is. As a coach, like your health is my priority. So I have a pretty health related checklist that I use, pretty specific to things like blood pressure, resting heart rate, that sort of stuff. making sure that they're all in check. And then if they're not, implementing things to get them in order. And then it's basically, let's pick a comp or, a potential testing day, depending on where they're at and how advanced they are. So if they're new, I wouldn't put them in a comp, or maybe a novice comp for a while, a good 6 months, just get some real training under them, have some fun. If they're intermediate to advanced, it's like, well, let's pick the comp and work backwards. So, okay, we've got 3 months, 12 weeks, 16 weeks, 20 weeks to work. Let's work. Let's get your weight in check first, so that we're training at competition weight. I don't like weight cutting overly much, to be quite honest. I'm not a fan of cutting into comp, just because, like, why would you be in a deficit when you need to be, lifting 90% plus of your 1RMs leading into comp? Makes no sense to me. And then, going from there, really. So I'd work like a height block or a GPP block, depending on how much time we have, and then just working straight into hypertrophy, like a comp specific hypertrophy, so movement specific hypertrophy into strength, into peak.
Yep.
Very, very simplistic, man.
And what is your ideal, I guess, time frame to prep someone for a powerlifting competition?
If it was up to me, it'd be that 16 to 20 week mark. I would really like, depending on what condition they're in. So if they're fairly healthy, fairly conditioned, I can work to a sort of a 12 to 16 week block. If I need time to get them, on weight, then get their health in a better position, I'd like that 20 week mark, to be honest.
Yep. And do you think, obviously with powerlifting, I guess powerlifters get this sort of stigma of like the fat powerlifter. And I guess a lot of the guys back in the day, like a lot of the guys coming out of like, I guess, out of West Side.
Yeah, I knew you were thinking West Side.
Were essentially that fat powerlifter. And then you got guys like coming up now who, like even going back towards Dylan, like for a guy who weighs 170 plus kilos, he's definitely not out of shape. Like he's in pretty good nick for a guy who's that big. Then you got guys like Sebastian Oreb who are quite lean for powerlifters. Like the Lily Bridges are both in good nick. Do you find it easier now getting people to make weight? Like obviously I've seen some people who I guess that quintessential sort of like chubby powerlifter. I'm
fairly fortunate, man. Touch wood. Like I actually haven't had a client miss weight ever.
Yeah.
Out of all my clients that I've had to put through a weight cut for comp. So I've been very fortunate in that aspect. At the same time, I always say to people that have this conversation with, well, does fat contract? No. So why are you fat? Like
very, very, very good point.
Well, it's just, like being fat, like as harsh as it is, and sometimes I do have to have the harsh conversation, but being fat isn't healthy. I don't know in what world do you think being fat is healthy? Like it's not. Yeah. So let's get you healthy first. And that's the sort of terminology that I'll use, health first. It's a health-focused block that I want you, it could be that the block is just high rep sort of stuff. And it's like, well, I'm going to get you, your blood pressure down, your resting heart rate down, which I've done with a couple of clients that I've had, and they've dropped 20 points on their blood pressure and they're feeling great. And their resting heart rate's dropped, 10 beats per bloody minute. Like, yeah, you're now deemed healthy. Everything about you is going to be more efficient.
Yeah. And I think that's with that position, a lot of people think that like that being that, I guess that chubby powerlifter or whatever it is, that it's necessary to move big weight. But as you said, fat doesn't contract, muscle does. Having more muscle is going to allow you to lift more weight. Not
exactly right.
But on that note, do you think that there is a teetering point where, like, obviously you do need some cushioning around the joints for like some of those guys that are lifting those big numbers?
Man, do you need cushioning? Yeah. Does it need to be fat? I wouldn't think so. You can have fluid in the joints that don't need to be fat. There are, depending on the competition and the sanction that you're in and all that sort of stuff, and like the federations that you're competing in. There's many, many ways around it. Something as simple as creatine will give you a little bit of fluidity around the joints. If you know how to manipulate something as simple as creatine, then you're going to be fine.
Yeah,
it's just this whole age-old mentality of being fat, and majority of the people that do it, it's like they're bigger and fatter because they think their movement mechanics change, which they do. Don't get me wrong. The bigger you are, obviously, the more change in biomechanics you have, not necessarily mean it's of benefit It's like you're bigger, you might squat more, but you may not hit depth because you're too fat and your quads hit your stomach. Cool. Like, what's the point of being so fat and moving 400 kilos 3/4 of the way down and still getting red lighted? I don't get it.
Yeah, I guess it's a very it is a very harsh reality for some people. I guess it also comes down to like people that do the old dirty bulk and think they look good. It's like, man, realistically, you're holding like 20 kilos of body fat. Like, it's not. You're not jacked.
You haven't. That 3 kilos of lean tissue you put on, you probably could have put on while still being lean.
Yeah, and it is. I think it's and I think with people coming through like Thor Bjornsson and Seb and a few other people, they're coming through and pushing numbers while being lean. Like what's it called? What's that Russian guy's name that has the huge deadlift for his weight? Is it Yuri? Yuri Belkin.
Yeah.
God, man, and he's jacked. Like, he's not in any way overweight. He's lean as shit, and it's I think that
you've got one over there in WA. You've got Rate.
Yeah, well, perfect example. He could probably step on stage with in a bodybuilding show. He's that lean.
Yeah, and that's why I remember seeing him at Nats. I was like, dude, like, just go jump over to the bodybuilding comp. Like, man, you're a freak.
But it's even to say, like, you had do you remember when Lucky did the powerlifting show before Arnold's last year, like, or before Nationals? Sorry, like, it's not to say that you can't push big numbers while still being shredded.
Yeah, and there's a girl in New South Wales that did it. Was it Eiling Mart, something like that?
Yeah.
Did the same thing. She put up some crazy numbers powerlifting, and she did bodybuilding the next day, or vice versa. I think she did bodybuilding the day before, and then powerlifting comp, and came second or something. It's not to say that you can't do it. It just shows you don't need to be fat. Yeah,
and I think that obviously comes down to like nutrition in terms of strength athletes. It's like you want to be aiming for performance. It's a performance task. Like, if you're eating like fucking shit cunt, you're not going to perform well. And it is. Exactly right. I think it's like, I mean, I guess a prime example that when you compare, like, say, Brian Shaw and Thor Bjornsson and how they eat to the way Eddie Hall eats, and it's like, like,
exactly right.
It needs to change that aspect. I think powerlifting is. I remember the first powerlifting show I ever went to, man. How long ago now? 17 years ago. And there was like no guys under 80 kilos. And there was like 2 females, but they didn't look like females. So, and I can assume that performance enhancing drugs had a fairly large part to play in that.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
But it's changed so much since then. And I think one of the last shows I went to, there was a girl who was like 48 kilo.
Yep.
Yeah, like tiny little Korean girl who actually had to have blocks put on the floor either side of the bench press so her feet could actually.
Yeah, so she put feet down.
And
fair enough.
It's changed, gone from that 2 women at a show who looked like Willem Dafoe on steroids.
Yeah.
But to what it is now, on the last show I went to, there's 40 females. Ranging through all weight categories, and
man,
it's just exploded so much. Like, you see, over here, we're lucky enough to have the guys from Muscle Pit, like Henry Day and his crew, doing good things there, and they've got some monsters training out of that gym, both men and women. And then you've got the obviously the Rucci brothers as well that own which what was it? What were they before? They were PTC, weren't they?
They were PTC Perth, I think.
PTC. And now
PTC Perth, and now they've moved to the Rucci brothers.
But they got some, they got Rate training up there, and he's an absolute beast. And I think
got Brian Cook and all that. Amy Hapgood, heaps of good lifters.
Did you see that young fella Trent as well that was lifting out over here?
Yeah, I've seen some footage. Yeah,
I mean, he's a strong dude, man. He's only young, so it's still got a lot of potential to go. And then there is so much more exposure. The shows are so much bigger. There's way more people coming to see them, and I think our gym, so I'm at Gold's gym over in RBA, and we have we will share when people compete at novice shows and stuff like that, and it's happening ridiculously frequently. It's happening all the time. People have started getting into this strength training, and I guess because it's a fairly low barrier entry. You don't have to look a certain way. You don't have to be a certain age. You don't have to be a certain height, you can just go and compete and have a crack at it. And some people get bitten by the bug, and next thing you know, they're competing at like a fairly decent level. I want to try and get my wife to compete in a powerlifting show because what was it? I think it was 58 kilos. 2 weeks out from her figure competition, she squatted 140 for a triple.
Yeah, shit. It's pretty strong.
So, you know what I mean? Like, and that's like with like not training like a powerlifter or training like a bodybuilder.
Yeah, I was going to say, imagine with some actual strength-based training and peaking. That'd be interesting.
So it'd be interesting to see. And I've watched her bench like 75, like when she's never done any bench before. Yeah. So it is, and I think there's so much more room for the sport to grow, and it's becoming like a lot easier entry. But as we're saying, we're talking about like beginners and obviously working with people. What do you think people's biggest downfall is with programming and with attempting sort of like this style of training?
Man, I think the thing, so I'll talk from personal experience more so than observational. Like my body breaks every time I get to probably 85% to 90% of my 1RMs, and I'm in that sort of peaking phase. Something breaks. In saying that, I do have prior injuries. I have a torn labrum in my left shoulder. I've got no meniscus in my left knee. Like that's just from sports as a kid, just wear and tear. Like there's nothing to do with powerlifting specific. But at the same time, for me, then once I get to that point and I'm lifting some really nice numbers and then I break, it's sort of like, well, my motivation and my mentality towards it's like, why am I doing this? It's like I get so close and then I'm like, I can't be bothered. Just like I'm broken. Like there's no point. So I personally moved to like a hypertrophy based focus, and it's just been great because it's not as taxing physically. In terms of that, like it's just momentary CNS fatigue versus prolonged fatigue. Yeah. But I think then observationally, people they want so much so soon, and it's like you don't understand that it takes time. Like these guys that are squatting 400 kilos, like they've been squatting for 10, 15, 20 years. Like they've been training for a long time. Take away, the outside the norm, like your Larry Wheels and all these guys, who are doing insane,
like Dylan
insane things. Yeah, like doing all these insane numbers. Like some people, you're just going to get those freaks. Like you're going to get a generational freak. You can't help that. Take away those, then you're just going to be like everybody else. Unfortunately, like that's just how it is. Just put in the work, put in the reps, don't miss a set, don't miss a rep, do that block to block, month to month, year to year, and you'll see what happens.
I think it is. It's just human nature. It's wanting everything now.
Yeah. And then wanting to take everything to do it now. And that's where a lot of people just
Yeah. And on that topic, I know we weren't really going to talk about it, but I guess you see people, they'll come in the gym and they'll start training for a while. And they're like been training for 6 months, a year, I don't know, whatever it is. And next thing you know, they're taking like enough gas for the US to invade them.
Yeah, exactly.
And
it's exactly right.
It's just silly. Like you see these, I know we discussed this the other day, is these people taking these huge amounts of like performance enhancing drugs to try and make these numbers. And they don't realize that the human body's not supposed to drain that far, that quick.
Yeah.
Like bodybuilding, powerlifting, everything, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly.
The groundwork has to be put in.
Exactly.
I mean, it's I've seen one guy pop up on social media a few times, and don't get me wrong, he's getting pretty strong pretty quick, but you can almost guarantee that performance enhancing drugs played a part in him doing that. Yeah. But his technique is just atrocious on squats specifically. Yeah. And he's now posted he's torn his quad and it's like separated his quad.
That's what's going to happen. It's just things like that, like movement efficiency. If it's not there, then jumping on an enhancement protocol is going to just make it worse. It's just how it is.
Yeah. And especially if you got an imbalance, so like a structural imbalance or a muscular imbalance, or whatever the case may be, as you said, if you start taking performance enhancing drugs or whatever else you want to do, and you're going to exacerbate it and make it 10 times worse. And it's like you see some people, like especially with guys, the old powerlifting bodybuilding sort of style structure of rolled forward shoulders, poor thoracic spine mobility, really weak through their upper back, and next thing you know, they're damaged all the time. They're not performing properly. They're not moving the way they should be, And next thing you know, they've got like, I don't know, torn rotator cuff or whatever else it might be. And then it's just an absolute nightmare trying to convince these people that that's not the way of doing things.
Yeah.
It's human nature. Like we want to try and avoid pain as a human being. And that usually for most people, that pain is doing the hard work. It's training and putting the yards in. Like, I'm sure like you can speak on this from working with elite athletes or people who've been training for a while. To add 20 to 30 kilos to your max rep deadlift, or 1 rep max, is a huge feat. And if you could achieve that in a year, you'd be pretty stoked. Yeah, whereas people want that in like 4 to 5 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. They want it from, you know, from the start of one block to the end of the next. And you're like, mate, take your time. Like, what's your rush?
Yeah. And you think it's, I mean, I'm sure you see it as well with people trying to put more weight on each week, and then they'll fail that set. They won't get the reps or the sets. And then it's basically a failed workout in terms of strength acquisition. So they're basically setting themselves back, not forwards. And it just constantly perpetuates this thing of like, I want everything now. I don't want to put the hard work in. I don't want to train hard. And it is like, I've got some clients who've been with me for, 3-4 years straight of coaching. And like one female I was working with, she put on nearly 7.5 kilo of muscle in that time.
Yeah, nice.
And people are like, oh, like they just see the physique and then they're like, oh, I want to look like that. I'm like, well, be prepared to work hard.
And trained with me for 4 years.
Yeah, well, I remember Dan England made a really good comment one day when I was talking to him. He's like, people need to gauge their expectations on the amount of work they're prepared to put in.
Yeah, exactly right.
So it's not like walk in and like, okay, I want to look like Paige Hathaway or whoever else, famous fitness model, but I'm only going to train twice a week and not stick to my diet.
Yeah,
it's like, okay, you might look like that in 20 years if you're lucky.
Yeah.
But it isn't. I can almost guarantee it'd be the same for strength training. People are like, oh, I want to squat 300. Okay, cool. So it's probably going to take us like 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, exactly. And that's literally what I've done with my longest serving client, Darcy. I've had him for, I think, 4 years now, maybe 5 years. And I remember his first comp, he put up, a 170 squat in sleeves, 120 bench, and I think a 220 deadlift, something like that. And now he's putting up a 300 deadlift, a 280, 290 squat, and the 180 bench or something like that. I don't know. I can't even remember off the top of my head. But it's like we planned it. So it's like I had him and I put in a 5-year plan. I'm like, okay, well, these are the numbers we want to hit in 5 years. This is how we're going to do it, and just backtrack it. So every block is being backtracked. And then if there's been an injury or something, a setback, it's like, well, okay, this is the modification to that block.
Yeah.
And it just works back. And that's exactly what I've done. And it's just numbers don't lie. Hit the reps, hit the goal.
Yeah. And I think it's just constantly turning up and doing the work to try and achieve those set results. And I think
that's all it is.
People don't want to hear it though. They don't want to hear it. They want to.
It's the same with dieting. It's the same with dieting. I'm telling people, it's like, oh, I'm hungry when you're in a deficit. It's like, yeah, you're in a deficit. You're dieting. You're meant to be hungry. It's okay. You'll live. Like, it's the same premise. It's just like people don't want to do the hard stuff.
I had a client who was like up around like 5,700 calories. Big dude. And we cut it down to like 5'3". Yeah. And he's like, man, I'm so hungry. I'm like,
so hungry. Yeah.
You're literally eating enough food to feed like a small village and you're still whinging about your diet.
Yeah, I've literally got one of the same clients who was up at probably close to 5,000 at 110 kilo body weight, 112. And he's like, oh, I want to cut. I'm like, cool. We'll put you on like 4.7, I think, or 4.6. It's like, I'm starving. I'm like, relax, man. you're on 550 grams of carbs, like 600 grams of carbs. So I'm like, chill.
And it is, man. It's funny how it works like that way. And people just, they assume they've got to suffer. Like you watch some people who prep for bodybuilding shows, for fight camps. And like, cause I work with a fair few fighters like you have as well. And some of them just work hard. Like I think so far out of everyone I've worked with, fighters just do exactly what they're told, work hard, and no matter how much they're suffering, won't admit they're suffering. Whereas like
they're just machines.
Whereas bodybuilders are like massive hormonal messes who are like, oh, I'm dying. It's like, man, you're still on like 1,000 calories. Like,
like relax, you're fine. Yeah.
But it is. I think it's dealing with different athletes, like. Specific, like with fighters, for instance, I think I only work with like a few CrossFitters, but CrossFitters tend to be the same as well. They just do the work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas like powerlifters and bodies, like you give a powerlifter like who's been in a phase of doing like, I don't know, between like 2 to 6 reps per set. And then you start giving them volume work. They're like, oh, I'm so puffed out.
Yeah, it's always with my guys. They're always like when they're in their peaks, they always want volume, and when they're in one volume, they're like, oh, I want to be peaking again because they don't like either or. They're just never happy. They're just like, oh, get over it.
Oh, that's human nature, man. Like I think it's the same with everyone. We always want what we can't have.
I wouldn't know what a bloody 1RM is anymore. I've only been doing 12 plus reps for the last 7 months or something.
How have you found that? Like, because I know, funny story. So when I did Seb's course over in Perth, I tore my quad on the first day.
Oh, Jesus.
So nothing major like sartorius and iliopsoas, like inserting into my hip. I think it was about 6 mil tear in one and 7 mil tear in the other. And I thought I just pulled my hip flexor.
Yeah, right.
So me being the dumbass that I am, I continued to squat and deadlift for 2 days. And then on like the last day, like, because he goes, all right, what lifts is everyone shit at? And I was like, mine was like front squats. So he woke me up to like a 140 kilo front squat.
Yeah.
And for like me, because I hadn't done it anymore, it was quite hard. And like we got to like the last day, I'm like, fuck, I'm in a lot of pain right now. Like I wonder what this is. And I went and got physio treatment for it. And my physio's assistant sunk her thumb into the tear in my hip.
Yeah, right.
And I ended up having like 28 weeks off squatting from that. Just because like I'm insane that I did manage to like catch my foot on the edge of the couch in the dark, chasing the cat through the house and reopened it.
Yeah.
And 28 weeks of no squatting, man. Like mentally, it's hard. Like I was starting to get some decent traction, like squatting around like 220, 230, and then nothing. And it's like, shit, like I can't do anything. And I couldn't even do anything standing up because obviously every time I try and brace through my core, it was like I couldn't bench, couldn't deadlift, couldn't do anything. And it's how are you finding it? And how do you find that some athletes deal with like injuries? Because I know quite obviously with powerlifting comes injuries. Like I've seen some pretty heavy duty injuries, like Big Shannon from Muscle Pit when he tore his lat, and he did a pretty decent job of that. Man, like it is like I've seen torn pecs and torn biceps and all that sort of stuff. Like, how do you find clients sort of work their way through this, and like what sort of your methods to try and help people through this?
It really depends on, I guess, the injury and the severity of the injury. But at the same time, it's like, for me, an injury is just an opportunity to fix something else, right? It's like,
that's true.
Tear your pec, okay, well, it doesn't mean you can't do lower body still. There are things that you can do for your lower body, especially if you do have access to a commercial gym. Like it's very, very simplistic, man. And vice versa. Like, you tore your quad, or you busted your knee, or you did your hip. You do have the opportunity to bring up that upper body. That's just the mentality towards it. So I think putting that mentality into my client's head is where I try to work on, or what I try to work on most. It's just trying, like, obviously injuries suck. It's like, I'm there, I'm with you. Like, I know, like I've got a subluxed rib that subluxes nearly every 2 weeks now. Like, it's annoying. Like I've got, I've torn my shoulder. I've got a torn labrum in my shoulder. I've strained my pec. I've nearly torn it, bicep. I've done everything. So it's like, I get it. I'm with you. But at the same time, you have one or two choices. You can be down on yourself, or you can turn around and say, hey, this is an opportunity to fix something else. Yeah. And that's where I try to try and instill on them. So, yeah.
And I think it is with, like, obviously rehab with some injuries with some clients. It is trying to convince them, like, obviously there is a silver lining to everything. They can focus on their nutrition, and they can focus on their recovery and their rehab and stuff like that. And I think a lot of people have this misconception, or this sort of, like, I guess, stigma with rehab, is that because there is so many, I guess, subpar quality allied health professionals when it comes to rehab.
Agreed.
I mean, and I'm sure you've experienced that firsthand, because I sure as hell have. Like I compressed L4, L5 tore capsules, did a decent job to my lower back when I was in my early 20s, and was basically told, look, you can't lift anymore, you can't squat, you can't deadlift, you've got to quit your job.
Yeah,
we got to fuse your spine, all this sort of stuff. And then like I finally found a decent specialist who like worked with like the Korean Olympic teams and stuff like that. He's an orthopedic.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And he's like, all right, do you deadlift? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, all right, we're going to keep deadlifting. So, all right, cool. I'm happy with that. And then no surgery, all the rest of it. But it took me finding someone to, I guess, reassure me that this rehab process was going to work. We are going to get through it, and I can go back to doing what I'm doing. Whereas like I've had clients in the past who have come to me and they're like, oh, I just wanted to get a little bit fitter. Like they'll come to me for nutrition, obviously to lose a bit of weight to help with said injury. Might be a knee, might be a hip, whatever else it is. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, what are you doing for rehab? And they're like, oh, my physio's just got me walking in the pool. I'm like, okay, cool. That's going to help, obviously alleviate pain, but what are you doing for strength? What are you doing for strength programming? And they're like, oh, I'm not allowed to. Who told you that? Oh, my physio. Okay, well, does your physio lift? And like, no. Well, okay, well, we're not going to listen to him.
Yeah, exactly.
We're actually going to work. I agree. We're actually going to
finding someone. Yeah, man. It's finding someone that you get along with, and then probably share a similar line with in terms of rehabilitation and that sort of stuff, and then being able to recommend your clients to them. Whereas, like, I'm lucky. Like, for me, when I first started, one of my old clients was a myotherapist. So, like, when I was teaching jiu-jitsu, one of my clients. So I'd give him free privates and he'd just give me free treatments. It was perfect combination. And then I was getting a little bit too big, I think. And he's like, look, my hands can't take jiu-jitsu and treating you. So I need you to go see my mate. And his like best mate's a chiro. And at the time, as soon as you hear the word chiropractor, you're like, oh, here we go, chiropractor, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, nah, trust me, it's not like that. Check him out and see how you go. I'm like, all right, no stress at all. Went and saw him, no joke. First session, he's like going through his assessment. He's like, oh, you have a bucket handle tear in your medial meniscus. And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, yeah, I can see from the assessment and moving you around, that's exactly what it is. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what it is. That's what it said on the x-ray. Like, yeah. So he's like, he was spot on. And then from then on in, I started recommending my lifters go there. So he's just had hands-on experience now for 3 years with powerlifters. So now a lot of powerlifters go to him because, we've built that foundation. So it's like I've seen him weekly, literally for 3 years. Like I don't miss a session. It's Wednesday, 10 a.m. That's where I go. Yeah. Like it's having that confidence in someone else to then also treat your clients. And I think building that circle of allied health professionals. So it's like I'm very fortunate. I've got him as a chiropractor. I've also got like one of my clients is a sports medicine doctor. Yeah. So like that works real well for me. And then I've also got an endocrinologist.
That's
so
handy.
It's like I've got like all these guys around me where I'm like, but it's just taking years and years and years of building this circle where I can go. And the best thing is they all lift. All of them.
So that's
so it's like,
as you said, I think you need to have that sort of grounding of like, okay, like I'm very lucky in that my massage therapist is a brown belt at the gym that I was training at. So we trade me handling his nutrition for him, treatments, which is great. And he understands the sport. And then I've got Cameron Hyes from Train Physio and Fitness, he's the head physio for Muscle Pit. And I've been referring to Cam for like 3 or 4 years now. And I refuse to. It's an hour drive, and over an hour and 20-minute drive for me to go see Cam, and it's
worth it.
It's worth it. I mean, Cam's a competitive, or has been a competitive powerlifter and bodybuilder. Has worked with rugby teams, gymnastics teams, all that sort of stuff, and he refuses to do anything less than an hour consult.
Yeah, and perfect.
It is like I can't. I hope he listens to this. I can't give him a big enough shout out because he is that good. And his, I guess, ideology is that if I can see you more than twice, we need to do some scans and figure out why, or I'm not doing my job. I'm not doing my job properly.
And that's the beauty of it.
It is, man. Like I've gone there with certain issues. I'm like, oh fuck, I'm gonna be out for weeks. This isn't gonna work. Like you get down on yourself. You can't train. And next thing you know, he's treating me and I'm back to lifting again. It's like, oh, this is great. So, and it's having that circle of allied health professionals is so crucial to helping people, being able to pick people's brains on certain things. And like for instance, if I sent a client to Cam, I said, hey man, I think it might be this, this, and this. This is the sort of because then I guess it shortens the amount of time that he has to ask questions when they go in, so we can
exactly right.
spend more time treating them. yet to find a decent endocrinologist in WA. They're all pretty shit, to be honest.
Yeah, fair enough.
But yeah, and it is, man. Like, I think people go to physios and like massage therapists and stuff like that, and they see the qualification. Okay, cool, this person can help me. Yeah. When realistically, most can't. Like, you need to find someone who understands the sport that you're doing. Like, exactly. I remember my physio was busy, so I had to I needed emergency treatment on my neck. Went and saw a physio close to my house, and she was like a 40-kilo like Asian woman who like couldn't even get into my traps. Like, it's just, you know, I'm not an overly big guy. So, and she just couldn't even get them. Like, oh, fuck, I just wasted. And she's like, oh, you got to come back and see me every 2 weeks for like the next like 4 months. And I'm like, yeah, no, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. Yeah.
But I think it is. And it's, I guess you're very lucky in that you've had these introductions with them being your clients so that you get this firsthand experience. And I think that's amazing. And that's the fact that you can sort of, and they know that they'll obviously be able to know exactly what to give people and what to do. But what would you say to people who, given that powerlifting is a sport that obviously can bring injuries and like tightness, like even I do encourage clients to take their body more proactive rather than reactive. Like, obviously, if someone's holding excessive tension in knees or hips or glutes or lower back or whatever else, for them to address it early rather than let it go bang and then have an issue. But what would you say is the best option for someone to, like, I guess, look into that sort of aspect? Like, what would you advise someone to look for when they are trying to, because I know so many powerlifters, man, who literally let their bodies get to the point where they're like falling to bits and will then go see someone once it's fallen to bits rather than going, okay, cool, I probably need to go see my physio or a physio, get some treatment, get some dry needling done. What would you say is your best protocol for finding someone adequate?
Yeah.
And also when to go. Like, what should people be looking for?
Dude.
I guess
I tend to. Sorry.
No, keep cutting.
The break keeps going on and off. I was like, I'm talking. I don't know what's going on.
But with I see a lot of people, they don't have this, I guess, awareness of what their body's doing. Especially, I guess, for someone who is very new to like strength training, like a lot of things like, oh shit, like, okay, my glute minor is starting to lock up, or my shoulders are starting to roll forward from excessive like pec tension, stuff like that. Like, people don't realize these things are happening until they're like, oh wow, I can't move.
Yes. So with my guys, especially, I tend to tell them, ones that I've had for a while, it's like we have a thing in place, and I'm lucky with the chiro that I have, especially if they're based here in Melbourne. I have a thing in place with them where it's like they go see them either weekly or fortnightly in comp prep, just to keep them on point. And it's pretty easy. I don't need to convince them because it's like they're pretty battered up anyway, so they're more than happy to say, okay, yeah, I'm gonna go get a treatment. So that works well. Outside of comp prep though, I always suggest to clients, it's like, once a month at least, you should be putting aside funds for a treatment. And it's like, and I've done in the past, before, it's like, don't pay me this month if you can't afford to, and go get a treatment. It's fine, I'll program you for the month. Like, I don't care. Like, your health is still going to be more important. I've been fortunate enough to just go to my car and just go like, dude, like, I need you to do me a solid. Can you help this person out? Look after them. And they're like, yeah, like, no stress. I'm lucky that I've referred so many people and been going for so long. I've probably built up a little piggy bank there. So I get away with it. But I always encourage at least once a month, if not fortnightly, depending on, I guess, availability, your finances and all that sort of stuff. I'm very proactive when it comes to treatments. Like, I go weekly. I've been going weekly literally for 3 years.
Yeah. And I think it is, especially as we sort of progress and as we get older. Like, I know, hell, I turned 30 and everything just felt like it started to break on me. But it's
like that.
It's like, I use the example when I'm talking to my clients, and when they're like, oh, like, yeah, I'm all good, and like, I'm just a bit sore, and like things are a bit niggly, or they say like, oh, I feel a bit rusty, or something moving right. Okay, so would you let your car get to the point where the dash light is on, and then drive around in it for an extra month, and then wonder why it's broken? And they're like, no. I'm like, well, why are you doing it right now with your body? You're getting all these sort of, I guess, this negative feedback in terms of tightness. And they might not be sleeping properly. Digestion might be not be working right. All these things. And people will just let this stuff happen where their body is just fucked and then don't do anything about it.
I completely agree.
And you would think it'd be less prevalent in more advanced athletes. And I think they're worse.
They definitely are. 100% they're worse.
Like they're worse. Like some of the fighters I work with, they're like, oh man, like this is hurting and that's hurting or whatever else. Or even in terms of nutrition, like they come to me like, oh man, like I've got no energy and I'm sleeping during the middle of the day. And I'm like, you didn't think to come and see me about this sort of stuff? Like it's things that we need.
I feel like it's almost like they wear it as almost like a badge of honor. It's kind of like, yeah, I'm sore. Like I've been training hard. Like I'm going to complain and you're going to listen to it and you're going to understand that I train hard. It's like, cool, dude. Like I get that you train hard, but at the same time, you need to also look after yourself. It's called balance. Like, yeah, train hard, but recover well. Otherwise, you can't keep training hard.
Yeah, and like even like watching that West Side versus the World documentary, and you see half these guys who are literally falling apart at the seams.
Yeah,
and they're like, yeah, this is hardcore. Like I'm a powerlifter. This is West Side. I'm like, yeah, man, but you're going to be in like a wheelchair by the time you're like 50. Yeah. Like Ronnie Coleman's a perfect example of that.
Yeah.
Of a person not taking care of their body and not sort of noticing the signs of like, hey man, I probably should take a step back and look after myself so I don't end up a complete cripple. But it is, and like you see some of these guys like who will go push their body to the absolute limit and then wonder why everything's fucked. Like it's I think one of the ones like Vlad Alhazov, the guy who squatted so he did a seminar in WA at Muscle Pit, which I was lucky enough to go to. And he was talking about when he tore every single ligament and tendon in his knee. So he snapped all three completely clean through and basically turned his leg 180 degrees trying to squat 565 or something.
Yeah.
Something ungodly amount. And he ended up having this experimental treatment, I think, because he's part Israeli and part Russian. I think he had a surgery in Israel or something, and he had to sign a waiver form. So basically what they did was they cut the ligaments out of a cadaver and bridged the gap between his, like, because they said to him, look, you're too big. You're like 6'5" and 180 plus kilos. We can't stretch your ACL and all that distance to over that distance. So like, okay, so there's this experimental surgery. Like, so we're going to cut the ligaments out of another body and bridge the gap in between these to make you, and he had to sign a waiver form because there's a 50% chance he's going to lose his leg.
Jesus, that's crazy.
So like if it goes septic and they don't take, like we're going to have to take the leg.
Well, you take a leg off. Yeah, shit.
And like, I guess from a guy who people see is so hardcore, like he was in through like 2.5 years of rehab. Like he was in a full, he was in a full hip to knee or hip to ankle cast for like 16 months. Yeah. And then comes back and breaks the world record in squat. Like I think it is. Some people need to realize that being injured doesn't make you hardcore sometimes. Like I know, like this is in powerlifters, bodybuilders, like all the way through every athlete. Like you've only got one sort of vessel, so to speak. Last thing you want to do is poke too many holes in it.
Right. I mean, it's got an expiry date. Like, why do you want to keep bringing that expiry date forward?
And I think it is. I think it is, Ben. I think like I guess women are more prone to looking after their body with rehab and stuff like and listening. That excludes my wife, but
and I was gonna say I agree. My girls are great. Like they listen. Yeah. My clients just like they're pretty proactive. I don't even have to tell them anymore. They're like, I'm gonna get treatment. I'm like, good. I don't have to force you to go do it.
Yeah, and I think it is. I think it comes from, I guess, that drive to be like overly masculine. The fact that like, I'm injured, but I'm going to push myself through it because that's like the thing that you do. Yeah. And like realistically, it's not the thing you do because you'd end up being trashed. And you know what I mean? Like you could have something as simple as like, I don't know, like a slight tear in ACL or slight pec tear or like a little tear in your quad like I had. Like I was quite lucky, and it's like I was like, shit, like I don't ever want this to get any worse and like stop me from training. So like you sort of go, hang on a sec, I've got to reevaluate things for a while. And you take a small break to rehab, do it properly, and then you can get back on track. But like I've dealt with clients in the past who have come to me and they've ignored rehab completely, and they're completely trashed, like completely trashed.
I think that's the other side of it as well, right? At the same time, you can only show a client so much and give them so much. It's on them to go do it. And if they don't do it, well, that's not your fault. That's not your problem. That's just, hey, you work with what you can, because same time, they have to take responsibility. You can't spoon feed them too much, I guess.
Yeah. And I think that can be a bit of a toxic trait that some coaches fall into, is that literally doing exactly that, spoon feeding their clients and telling them exactly what they want to hear. And at the end of the day, you've got to sometimes be harsh with clients, like having
they're people. They're not kids.
Yeah, exactly. They're grown adults, and you need to treat them as such. I mean, we're not their parent, we're not their partner, we're not their brother or sister, we're their coach. And unfortunately, we get paid to tell the hard truth sometimes. Like it's, in terms of a doctor, you're not going to get upset with the doctor because he tells you, you've got some medical condition. It's a harsh truth. He can pussyfoot around it and be like, oh, you're going to be fine. You just need to drink more water. But and it is I guess the analogy that I use with some clients where they're like I tell them exactly what they need to go do. Okay, go book in, see my physio, go see the massage guy or whatever else they need to do. And they come back in 2 weeks and they're like, oh yeah. And I'm like, oh, have you done it? And they're like, no. I'm like, okay, so if you went to a doctor and he said, okay, you've got, I don't know, a condition that requires a certain medication, and then you don't take it, are you going to blame him or whinge to him that you're not getting better? No, you're going to be like, okay, well, this doctor's told me, okay, I've got to take antibiotics to get rid of this, I don't know, sinus infection, chest infection. And I haven't done it. So that's only on me. But yet some clients will try and come back and like give you the old sort of sob story, like I'm still sore. And that, when realistically they just need to toughen the fuck up and not necessarily toughen the fuck up, but take some ownership. Take some ownership of their actions and go, okay, cool. I can either keep whinging about this and not progress, or I can listen to the person that I'm paying for their knowledge. Yeah. And this goes across, I guess, all fields: physio, chiro, endo. Just like if you're going to pay someone for their knowledge, actually take it. Like actually listen.
Exactly to it. Right. Well, yeah. What's the point otherwise?
Yeah. I mean,
I completely agree.
Even as something as simple as like with powerlifting, when you're trying to tell someone, okay, I want you to hit these numbers for this amount of like sets and reps, and like start of a 12-week block, they're probably going to be fairly easy for them to move, I don't know, say 100 kilos for 10 reps on squats. So then they can try and jump the weight up. Yeah. And next thing they're trying to do 120, I'm like, and then they fail it. I'm like, well, what was the point of that? And
exactly.
I guess, I know it's the most cliched term in like coaching is like trust the process, but it's true.
I feel like trust the process is also like it's trusting your coach. It's your coach's process. Yep. So it's like trust the process that your coach has put in place for you. Just because your coach's process isn't the same as another coach doesn't mean it won't work.
Yep.
You know, every coach is different, and that's the beauty of variety, right? Every coach is going to their own philosophies, their own ways of doing things, and they still end up getting the same result. Like you get your result that you want at the end of the day. Yep. There's many different ways to go about it. Just trust your coach has your best interests at heart, and that's what they're doing.
Yep. And on the topic of that, like obviously with people wanting to get the coaches now, what would you encourage people to look for in a coach?
It's an interesting one. I mean, as a client, I get along with my coach really well, but we're very, very similar. A very similar mindset, very similar outlook on coaching as clients as well, because he's a client of another coach that I know. So for me, I think if I wanted clients, I probably want them similar to myself, if anything, some similar traits, whether it's a training philosophy, whether it's just an everyday type scenario where they're just their personalities are very similar to mine, and it makes it easier to get my points across, I guess. In saying that though, I do have some clients that are completely different to me, and they're great. Like I love them. They're awesome. But yeah, I guess when I'm looking for a coach, I'm looking for certain aspects of coaching. So it's like, for me, it's knowledge. I'm always looking for someone that's smarter than me in a field that I feel like I want to learn more in or learn from. So in that aspect, I mean, if that's one way to look at picking a coach. So if you're yourself a PT or a coach and you're wanting a coach, looking for that coach who does what it is that you potentially want to learn. Mm-hmm. Like I don't necessarily go for the strongest. I don't necessarily go for the biggest. like that doesn't bother me. I really don't care, because I know that, you know, weight on a bar is impressive in itself, and it takes a lot of time, a lot of dedication, but it doesn't make you the smartest person. And that's just how it is.
And like, I guess like going back to like Sebastian or working with like Thor and like other people he's worked with, like, I think he's probably one of the better coaches around. I've I guess had not a lot to deal with him, but like doing his courses and obviously like social media and things like that. But I think the way in which he coaches is very effective. And like a lot of the time, some of the best coaches in the world weren't very good athletes.
Yeah. They're just great communicators a lot of the time.
Yeah. Well, I think with really great athletes tend to be quite self-centered.
Yeah.
And I think in order to be the best in the world, you've got to be self-centered.
Agreed.
The way it works. And then when it comes to coaching, it's the total opposite. You've got to be the furthest thing from self-centered and have to consider other people all the time. And I think that's where people make mistakes sometimes. They go, so they'll find someone that can squat 400, whatever it is, whatever the case may be. But you're like, oh, that person's going to be a great coach because they can squat 400, mate. Well, that person's probably got a coach.
Yeah.
And just because they can squat 400 doesn't mean they're going to be able to coach you effectively. Like some people can't relay information to save their life.
Yeah, well, it's like I've actually found on a couple of powerlifting comps, like now that you actually mention it, it's like coaches that are competitors and then they wouldn't handle their clients on the same day because they're competing on the same day, whether it's the same weight class or not, you know.
Yeah.
But they wouldn't handle their client who pays them because they're too busy competing themselves. Now, like for me, that's stupid. That's beyond idiotic. It's just like, for me, I always said to my clients, like they were always encouraging me to compete. The only thing is my clients, mostly the guys that compete on the same day as me if I was to compete. So I just turn around and say, look, if it got to a point where I even made it to the platform not broken, I still wouldn't be able to compete because I'm too busy handling you guys.
Yeah.
Like that's my job. Like you guys pay me for a service. My service is to make sure you have a great day on that day. Why would I be competing for myself? Because you're right, you have to be somewhat self-centered. Like you have to be looking after yourself, and I can't do that and then look after other people at the same time. So it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and I think that's the case where it's people often opt for a coach. Like I guess this is one of the negatives of social media is that they will opt for a coach who looks amazing, has all the fancy photos of them like lifting said weight or looking a certain way or whatever else it is. Like, oh, this person's great. And then realize that like, and 9 times out of 10, that person's going to charge them an absolute fortune because they've already got said social media or whatever else it is. And be heavily let down. And I'm very much in the same belief. Like I know that like when I try and do mentorship calls or learn from people, get coached by people, knowledge is the primary driver of my choice.
100%.
I mean, like with people like Luke Lehman and like Seb and like Dean McKillop and people like them who you're paying for the knowledge. I mean, like you can go and find the person who looks the best in the world, but like if you aren't getting knowledge from that, I guess, interaction, then it's completely pointless. Like it's not like that person.
Agree.
It's not like that person's good looks or strength is going to rub off me somehow like some magical genie. It's very much that like the acquisition of knowledge. And I think even for Gen Pop clients, that's what they should be trying to get, because if they don't learn anything and they become out on their own, they've finished with said coach or whatever it is, they're essentially like a boat sitting in the water without a motor. Like you're on your own, you're screwed. Like you now have to figure everything out on your own if you haven't learned anything through that process. So I think it's very much that should be the primary driver of trying to find a coach. And I think, you know what I mean? I guess this is being very generalized, but some powerlifters are just like, I can lift heavy things, so to speak.
Yeah,
like,
and there's nothing wrong with it.
There's nothing wrong with it. But
there's like some guys that just fucking strong, and it's like that's so cool to watch. You go like, you train hard, you work hard, but if you can't coach, don't offer coaching. It's okay. You don't have to coach.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to like when it comes down to like adequate periodization and like skill acquisition and knowing different phases of training and stuff like that. it is a lot of number crunching, and it can be quite technical on, I guess, our side of things. Like, I haven't coached as many anywhere near as many powerlifters as you have, but I found that their programming was way more intricate than hypertrophy or strength and conditioning for like a fighter or whatever. It's all numbers. It's a numbers game.
Yeah.
Like
literally
for a bodybuilder, what weight they're lifting on certain days realistically doesn't matter all that much as long as you get the desired result. But when it comes to powerlifters, it can get quite technical, and obviously making sure that everything sort of coincides with everything else that's going on, like their training, their recovery, their nutrition, everything. It is quite an advanced concept. So I'm glad it's you doing it, not me.
Man, like I said, I sort of fell into it, so I didn't even really intend to do it, but sort of the way things felt. So I was like, okay, roll with it.
And how did you fall into it?
So powerlifting, I had a rehab client way back in the day. She had gone to a powerlifting gym down here, tried to fix her squat. The information she got just wasn't good for her, I guess, at the time. Don't know if it was poor coaching or whatever it was. Stuffed her hip. Needed a rehab coach, came to me for rehab, fixed her hip, and then she was quite strong, 63 kilo lifter, 64 kilo lifter, squatting 120 without training in sleeves. So, it's nearly 2-ton bodyweight squat without training. I was like, okay. And then we just kept getting stronger. She kept adding 10 kilos, like every sort of 12-week block we did. It was just these newbie gains that she kept having. And she had a genetic predisposition to powerlifting and power sports. Like, she was built like a, brick shit house. So she went from like a 120 squat to 130, 140, 150 in comp. And so we did a novice comp. So her and my current client, Darcy, that I've had for a while, novice comp, both killed it, put them in sanctioned comps, and that was it. It was just sort of hit the ground running.
Nice. And I guess it is nice to be able to have someone who can can progress very quickly when the right coaching is sort of implemented. And it's
I'm just very fortunate. I think she was doing her own sort of training in the gym, and then she just never really had a coach. And then she went to one coach and just had a bad experience, I guess, and lived locally. So it sort of just worked out. I think I had a Facebook advertising at the time. I can't ever remember. And then, from there, it just sort of blossomed, and then that was it.
Yeah. And how long have you been coaching for?
5, 6, what am I, 31, 5, 6 years. Like, we'll call it coaching. I've been PTing since I was 18, 19.
Yeah.
But specific to sort of strength rehab coaching, probably 6 years now, 5 years.
Yeah. Okay, cool. That's a pretty decent string. Same age as me.
So I think, all up would be like 10 plus years of, we'll call it PT/coaching.
Yeah. Sweet, man. So if people want to find you, if they want to see some of your content, so you do put out some good stuff, and you are quite good looking.
I appreciate it. It's just the beard, man. Beard and the eyebrows. They're genetic. I do not shape my eyebrows for any female that asks. I don't do it. I'm not that person. I get it all the time. Or I get them from mum.
I have to shape mine. I have to shape mine. I end up with one eyebrow.
I'm very, very, very fortunate in that aspect.
But yeah, so if people want to see your stuff or want to get in touch with you or have a look at your content, what's the best way?
It's just Elite Strength Coach on Instagram, dude.
Yeah.
Very, very simple. Yeah, man.
Yeah.
I was building a website.
Yeah.
But that's a side project that's probably going to take me 5 years. So
yeah. And I think websites, man, these days are like, no one looks at them.
Nah. I put a link tree thing on my Instagram page the other week, and I felt very accomplished. So that was one of probably the things that I've done. That's about it.
Yeah, sweet. All right, man. Well, thank you very much for coming on today. It's been good chat, obviously talking all things strength. We'll probably have to get you on again at some point to talk about all the other things that you work with.
Yeah, man.
But yeah,
can do, my dude.
Thanks so much for coming on, man.
Thank you. Thanks, buddy.